Hello gamers, this is Sai, and welcome back to Which Way Games. Are gamers ready for the ultimate battle? And with that being said, let's get on with the video. Before I start, I just want to say thank you to everyone that subscribed and shared my channel. It really means a lot to me and I appreciate the support. Anyway, side-scrolling beat-em-ups have always been a staple of gaming, especially in the arcades with games such as Final Fight, Captain Commando, and probably the best title for any game that I've ever played. Ninja Baseball Batman. I mean, how cool is that? Definitely one I'll come back to. And with most gaming genres that will appear in the arcade, a home port would usually follow, sometimes being really faithful to the arcade counterpart, such as the Mortal Kombat series. Now in the 90s, gamers were entering what I call the golden age of 16-bit gaming. Gamers were playing games that would carry on being played well into the new century, even with some games that flew under the radar at the time, making a bit of a comeback. The Mega Drive had some side-scrolling beat-em-ups at the time, such as Alien Storm, but most of these arcade ports didn't capture the magic of the arcade. To create more interest for the Mega Drive, Sega decided to create a brand new game from scratch within the beat-em-up genre. And then out of nowhere, an absolute gem of a game was released for the Sega Mega Drive. This game was Streets of Rage, that some gamers class as an absolute classic, alongside a few others, but where did it all begin? Development for Streets of Rage began life as a rival to Capcom's highly rated arcade game called Final Fight that was ported to the Super Nintendo. Final Fight, as I've mentioned before in previous videos, paved the way for the legendary Street Fighter 2, which then went off on its own sub-series of games, all of which are highly enjoyable to play. The Super Nintendo port of Final Fight did end up having some alterations, but then that was to be expected for arcade ports at the time. In Japan, Streets of Rage was known as Bare Knuckle Ikari no Tekken and was developed by Sega CS2, an internal team within Sega. They were tasked with adding features that were lacking in the Super Nintendo's version of Final Fight. These would be being able to play as 3 characters, as well as having a 2-player co-op and having more enemies on the screen. Sega also brought in the musical talents of composer Yuzo Koshiro, who had previously worked on Revenge of Shinobi, and he was influenced by electronic dance music as well as a few other music genres that were hugely popular in the late 80s, early 90s. And in 1991, Streets of Rage was released for the Sega Mega Drive. And like always, let's go back to the past to see how Streets of Rage was advertised.
The largest and hottest library of 16-bit games plays on Sega Genesis, featuring Streets of Rage, the fighting game that'll knock your socks off, with 40 individually controllable attack moves, and a neighborhood crawling with punks, muggers, and urban slime. Streets of Rage, only on the 16-bit Genesis system from Sega.
The story of Streets of Rage begins in a once peaceful city where the biggest crime was running a red light. Until one day, an evil crime syndicate moved in and took over the streets, as well as corrupting the local police force. The crime on the rise, this city would eventually become a rundown version of its former self. This is all thanks to the mysterious man known as Mr. X. 3 young cops repeatedly tried to make a task force to stop the crime syndicate, but their superiors are either bribed by the syndicate or they're afraid of what will happen to them. So Adam Hunter, Axel Stone and the beautiful Blaze Fielding get fed up with all the corruption within the police force and decide to take matters into their own hands. They leave the police force and with a mission to clean up the streets, they'll risk everything, even their lives, on the Streets of Rage. Gameplay for Streets of Rage has gamers controlling one of 3 selectable characters, unless playing in cooperative mode. Each of these 3 characters have their own strengths and weaknesses. The 3 characters are Adam Hunter, who is the heavy of the trio and has the best attack power, a good jump ability but is very slow moving. Blaze Fielding, who is the weakest, however she moves fast and has a great jump ability. And as for Axel Stone, well, he moves quick, has good attack power, but lacks the jump ability the other two have. Playing very similar to the legendary Golden Axe that was released 2 years prior, gamers will have enemies walking onto the screen from both sides, and sometimes from other locations, so watch out. Streets of Rage has 8 stages in total, which takes the trio of fighters all the way from the gritty streets to the penthouse of Mr. X. To progress through the stage, gamers will need to defeat each enemy before carrying on to the new section of the stage. At the end of each stage, there is a boss to contend with, who clearly has been popping steroids like Tic Tacs, and is huge compared to the character gamers choose to play as. As with other side-scrolling beat-em-ups at the time, gamers can collect various weapons to battle the enemies with, and occasionally find power-ups to replenish much-needed health. The special attack is the assistance of a police car, which the driver usually has a bazooka in. This will bring down a barrage of explosive napalms on the enemies, but gamers only get one of these special attacks per stage, so use it wisely. Obviously, in Stage 8 with Mr. X, this attack can't be used, but if gamers have made it this far, then they won't need it. Streets of Rage was well received by gamers and critics, praising the fantastic graphics and brilliant music. Combining all this with great gameplay, as well as 2-player co-op, was an instant hit with gamers, and eventually was classed as a must-have game for the system. Proving to be such a hit, Streets of Rage went on to have 2 sequels for the Mega Drive, with each instalment improving on its predecessor with better graphics and gameplay. Streets of Rage ended up being ported to the Game Gear and the Master System, both of which had to be altered due to their respective hardware's limitations. Appearing in many compilation collections throughout the years, even Sega's main rival, Nintendo, had gamers playing Streets of Rage thanks to the arcade section on the Wii, and even PC gamers got the chance to play this classic of 16-bit history. Following on from the success of the sequels, there was going to be a further 2 Streets of Rage games made for the Sega Saturn. However, due to disagreement with Core, this never came to be, but instead, gamers got Fighting Force, which I'll come back to in future videos. Now, a comic strip was released in the beloved Sonic the Comic in the UK, and in this comic strip for Streets of Rage, fans of the series would be given a more detailed storyline that would follow the events of the game, and sometimes would have extra content too. Even leaving readers with a cliffhanger ending that would make them want more. Coming back to the story, Adam, Axel and Blaze finally confront Mr. X in his penthouse apartment. After a long and tiresome battle, Mr. X is defeated and the crime-torn streets of the city are free at last, with peace slowly returning. Adam returns to the police force to restore order and get rid of the corruption, while Blaze and Axel lead the force entirely to become heroes for hire. Now, this part is interesting. Before the trio face off against Mr. X, he offers them the chance to join his organisation. And if this is accepted, Adam, Blaze and Axel will become henchmen of Mr. X, before eventually taking over as the head of the crime syndicate. Overall, Streets of Rage is an absolute gem of a game to play, like I mentioned earlier. With its fantastic music, easy to pick up control scheme, and bringing the feeling of the arcade into gamers' homes is what really made Streets of Rage one of the games for the Sega Mega Drive gamers to own. Streets of Rage sold incredibly well and even helped shift more Mega Drive consoles, as well as being sold as a console bundle exclusive, very much like Sonic the Hedgehog and Altered Beast. And now that a 4th instalment of the series is in development, it'd be really good to see Axel Stone and some of his friends make a return after such a long hiatus. There was even a rumour of an animated TV series being made which might appear on Netflix. The same happened with Castlevania, so fingers crossed. Anyway, come back next time where Castle Grayskull is under threat by the evil forces of Skeletor. It's up to the most powerful man in the universe to stop him. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next game.